LiveFitPodcast, episode 109, Willpower, with Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Welcome to the LiveFitPodcast with Glenn Johnson, your resource for all things that contribute to good health. You will hear expert advice and interviews with leading authorities on fitness, food, fat loss, mindset, and the mind-body connection. You will find show notes, articles, and health programs at livefitpodcast.com.
Yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Johnson, your guide to better health. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please take a moment to rate, review, subscribe, and most importantly, share this episode with somebody you care about. Because today I have Dr. Glenn Livingston on the show again. He was on about 6 months ago talking about binge eating, and it was such a popular episode. I wanted to bring him on again to talk a little bit more about how you can redirect your eating habits to be happy, healthy, and free, and not be driven by food, not have your life ruled by food, but so you can take control of it. So today he's going to talk about the infamous willpower. That's right, willpower. How big of a role does it play in what you eat and your life? Well, let's get right into this episode and hear some more from Dr. Glenn Livingston. Hi, Glenn. How are you doing today?
I am doing terrific, Glenn. How are you?
I love introducing you, though it does make me sound a little bit
narcissistic or something.
Yeah, yeah. Anyways, for all the listeners that don't remember, Glenn Livingston here was on episode 103, and I wanted to bring him on again today because his information, his specialty about eating and binge eating and really how to change your habits to become more healthy is so topical, and it's something that I get asked about daily, literally daily. But for those of you that haven't listened to episode 103, Glenn, would you give us a quick background of who you are and why you're here?
Yeah, I'm a psychologist by training from a family of 17 psychologists and psychotherapists and counselors and psychiatrists and such, and social workers. And I was also a very serious binge eater for about 30 years. And I tried everything to overcome it. All of the traditional treatments didn't really work for me, and it don't work for a lot of people. The scientific evidence is pretty poor about it. And although I learned a lot about myself in the process, and I did a lot of soulful exploration, I discovered that it really wasn't the idea in our culture is that you can love yourself thin. And I discovered that because of the nature of our neuroanatomy and the lizard brain kind of taking over at the moment of impulse, and the hyper palatable foods like substances that are being produced by industry, all that salt, sugar, fat, starch, oil, like cytotoxins that you can fit into these bags and boxes and containers and package it up that it looks like so it looks healthy. And then the advertising industry says, I bet you can't resist. And the addiction treatment industry says you couldn't quit if you wanted to. We're just facing this perfect storm. And I discovered that when you try to love yourself thin, it makes it worse, because you're standing in lines at Starbucks, and there's a big chocolate bar at the counter, and there's this little voice in your head that says, hey, Glenn, chocolate grows on a cocoa bean, and it comes from a plant, and so where I'm going with this, chocolate's a vegetable.
Yeah.
Right? And it's that voice that gets you. Even if you fix the emotional problems, it's that voice that gets you. And if you learn how to spot those rationalizations and lies and either ignore them or dispute them, then you can clamp down and put out the fire regardless of what started the fire. So all of this digging for emotional reasons and everything, it's kind of like looking for, well, what was the match that struck the fire? But once the fire's lit, it's got a life of its own, and you're more interested in the equipment and techniques for putting out the fire than figuring out who struck the match and where it was. And you can do all that later. I know who struck the match that got me addicted to chocolate. I understand how that happened. I could tell you that story if you want me to. It understanding that gave me compassion for myself. It soothed my relationship with my mom. It helped me to, go through a divorce and, come out the other side thriving. But it didn't help me stop overeating. And the way that I stopped overeating was with a very practical and kind of crazy technique where I said that I'm going to make very clear rules so I know what healthy eating is and I know that it's not. Because I figured if I'm shooting at a target and I can't see the target or the target is fuzzy, the odds of me hitting that target are pretty bad. So I'm going to make really, really clear rules. So I would say something like, I will never have chocolate during a weekday again. I'm only ever going to have chocolate on a Saturday or Sunday again. And 10 people following me around all day would know whether I had chocolate on a Wednesday or not, whether I broke that rule or not. Mm-hmm. So there's no ambiguity whatsoever. And because there's no ambiguity, any voice in my head that suggested that I should have chocolate on a Wednesday, I decided that it was the pig that was saying it, my inner pig or my lizard brain. The actual things it was saying were pig squeal. The chocolate itself was pig slop. And I would not let farm animals tell me what to do, and I certainly don't eat pig slop. And I'm always embarrassed about that because I'm a sophisticated psychologist, and I've run companies that have done tens of millions of dollars of consulting, and have published all these papers and written books and stuff, and been in all these newspapers and magazines. And I get on these interviews and I say, well, I don't eat pig slop, and I don't like that farm animals tell me what to do. Yeah. But the reason that works, Glenn, is because at the moment of impulse, you don't have your logical brain. The lizard brain takes over, and you need something very primitive to wake you up and give you a few extra microseconds to remind you who you are and what choices you want to make.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And another thing I want to go back to what you said is you can't love yourself thin, and your whole explanation on that. But you're talking about the chocolate bar, and what I'm wondering is, would another excuse to eat the chocolate bar, if this is your attitude, is that, well, I love myself and I love chocolate and chocolate tastes good and it'll make me feel good, so I want to give myself something and be nice to myself because I love myself.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. I'd like to articulate it in a slightly different way and tell you a story along the way.
Sure,
okay?
Do it.
So initially I did this 40,000 person study when clicks were cheap on the internet and I could get those kind of people to my website over the course of a couple of years. And I was looking at the relationship between the foods that people chose that they couldn't seem to stop binging on, and the personality styles that they had, their level of life satisfaction, level of work satisfaction, all sorts of variables, assessments about their life. And I found a couple of really interesting things, and I'll just tell you the one about chocolate for right now.
Okay. I
found out that people that struggle with binging on chocolate tended to have some type of loneliness or heartbreak in their life. And the interesting thing about that was that it was true in my case. I had a real problem with chocolate. And by the way, as we talk about this, I'm not telling anybody not to have chocolate. If it works for you, that's great. I mean, my sister can take 2 little squares out of her purse and fold up the rest of the bar for Saturday. And I don't know what's wrong with that woman, but she can do that. And so when I learned about this, I thought I was going to win a Nobel Prize or something. I thought, wow, this is a really interesting connection. I said, well, yeah, I'm having some trouble in my marriage, and this was a long time ago, but now I'm divorced. It was obviously true. And I went to my mom, and I said, Mom, do you think it's just that I'm having trouble with my then ex-wife, my then wife? She said, well, honestly, in your upbringing, I was really overwhelmed when you were a toddler. Your dad was in the Army. He was a captain, and he was a psychologist, and they wanted to send him to Vietnam. And I was really terrified he was going to have to go to Vietnam. And my father, your grandfather, had disappeared for 9 months. And I was just in shock, horrendously depressed and overwhelmed and anxious. And when you would come to me crying or needing a hug or even wanting to be fed, it was too much for me sometimes. And So I discovered if I kept a bottle of Bosco chocolate syrup in the refrigerator on the floor, a little floor refrigerator, that I could just say, Glenn, go get your Bosco. And you'd literally go and suck on the bottle of Bosco chocolate syrup.
Wow.
And how much more of a connection could you ask for, right?
Yeah. That's pretty obvious.
And so you'd think, so there's the match that lit the fire, right? That's obviously the match that lit the fire. That's as early as we could go back to my chocolate addiction. Now, you'd think that I was cured at that point, right? Because, now I know what the problem is. And it did in some ways cure my relationship with my mom. I feel closer to her having shared that story. I feel more forgiving of her. I feel more forgiving of myself for having had the problem. But for many years, it didn't cure my problem, because what would happen is exactly what you were saying. My inner pig would say, you know what, Glenn? You're right. Your mama and your papa, they didn't love you enough, and they left a great big hole inside of you. And until you figure out how to fill that hole, until you find the love of your life and you eliminate all this loneliness, you are going to just have to keep on binging. Just keep on binging on chocolate. Yippee, yippee, yippee. And we all have that voice. I had patients who I was working with, and I didn't work with overeating a lot in the early days because I just had so much trouble with it myself. I didn't feel like I was going to be in integrity trying to solve that. But when I saw people talk about it a little bit, I'd address it with these new findings, and similar things would happen, whether it was chocolate or salty chips tend to be eaten by people who were feeling stressed at work, and pasta and bread tend to be eaten by people who were feeling stressed at home or depressed. And whatever the story was, they were very intriguing, soul-enhancing stories, but ultimately those stories were used as an excuse by the inner pig to keep on binging it. You don't have to call it a pig, by the way. You can call it your inner slacker. You don't have to say pig squeals. You can say they're slacker screeches. There are all different ways to go about this.
Right.
You're correct that digging emotionally is helpful. It'll make you more comfortable. It'll make you more forgiving about yourself and your problems. It'll help you understand where the match was struck, but it won't put out the fire. What puts out the fire is this kind of aggressive technique of carefully defining what the, what's healthy food and what's not, and hearing that voice. Now, there's one more thing about what you said, Glenn.
Yeah.
Most people think of comfort foods, and they're usually referring to things that didn't exist in evolution. They're usually referring to...
Never thought of it that way.
Well, it's like bags and boxes and containers and...
Mashed potatoes. Meatloaf.
Yeah.
Pizza. Exactly.
I mean, I don't remember any stories about cavemen ordering out for Domino's or something like that, right? It just wasn't there.
No.
And the reason that's important is that the substances that have been engineered, they're all concentrated sources of pleasure that evolution didn't prepare us for. We have no experience of a chocolate bar in the savannah. We don't have that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what happens is when you artificially concentrate those sources of pleasure, it gets you high to a certain extent, like a drug does. If you look at the ingredients of chocolate, for example, and I'm not telling anybody not to have it, and a lot of people can tolerate these things, and they feel like it's one of the compromises they make for putting up with all the stresses of society, that they also get these concentrated pleasure sources. But, there's theobromine and caffeine, and I forget about all the other ingredients, but
sure.
It's going to alter your neurochemistry in a way that you were not prepared for by evolution. And the reason it's important to switch from saying, I'm looking for comfort in my overeating, as opposed to, well, I'm looking to get high with food, is that most people are not comfortable thinking of themselves as a drug addict. And if you look at what's really going on, yes, food has an anesthetic effect. When you eat junk, you're nervous system gets a little messed up and it doesn't have the same ability to conduct the emotions. And so you don't feel some of the uncomfortable feelings that you're experiencing comfort from when you overeat. But what's also happening is you're getting overstimulated and your nervous system is it's getting high. It's a drug. And if you begin to understand that, then your motivation to cage that pig and draw clear lines and keep it in its cage is going to be stronger.
A lot of people think it comes down to willpower.
Well, that's a really important point, and I'm glad you brought the conversation in that direction because I had a few things I wanted to say about it. There's a book called The Willpower Instinct, which reviews the scientific research on willpower. And it's by William Baumeister, and I think it's Baumeister, right, and his associates. And essentially, I'm paraphrasing this, but what it says is that willpower is a fatigable muscle. There are only so many good decisions we can make over the course of a day. And this is why people start the day with the best laid plans, but by the right?
Yeah.
And then you get home and it's 9 o'clock at night and you think, oh my God, I can't resist that leftover pizza or that piece of cake or that muffin or, stopping at one of these fast food places on the way home. You just can't resist it. And the reason for that is that your willpower has run out. You've been operating with guidelines as opposed to rules. And guidelines always suggest that there's a possibility that you could make another choice. And when you work with guidelines as opposed to rules around your real trigger foods, every time that you're in a situation where it's possible that you could get the trigger food, you're taking a little bit out of that willpower bank for the day. And eventually it wears you down. But the solution to this is character. It's making statements of character, really making your decisions beforehand.
Right, making a plan.
Mm-hmm. And so if I say that I will never eat chocolate on a weekday again, then all my decisions about eating chocolate have been made during the week. I know that I'm not the kind of person who would ever eat chocolate during the week again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people think that's a radical statement, and it's not possible to say that. I want to talk about why people are afraid to say that and how we can overcome that. But I just want to illustrate the point of character a little more and show people that they're already making these statements of character themselves. They just don't know it.
Oh, okay.
Have you ever walked into a diner, Glenn, and there's a $20 bill sitting on the table, and you know it belongs to the waitress? It was her tip.
Yeah.
And there's no video camera, and it's late at night, and there's nobody watching. Do you take that $20 bill?
No.
How come?
Because I know it's the waitress's tip, and she earned it, and she's counting on it.
And
that's why she's working.
And take it a step.
It's the wrong thing to do.
And you're not the kind of person who would do the wrong thing.
I'm not the kind of person that would do that. Yeah.
It's not in your character.
Right.
You've made a character decision that you're not a thief.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even though it would be pleasurable, even though there'd be no immediate consequences, it's not in your character to take that money away from that waitress.
Yeah, I don't think it would be pleasurable, actually. I'm picturing it right now, and I don't feel good at all.
Well, you would have guilt because it's against your character. You would have benefit from it. You would have the money.
I would have the money, and there might be a little side of me that's like, haha, I'm $20 richer, but that would be 10% of me. 90% of me would be going, bad move.
And so that's what I mean by saying that character trumps willpower. There are things we would never do because we're not those kind of people. Yeah. There are things that we always do because we are those kind of people. I can decide that I'm not the kind of person who ever eats chocolate on a weekday. Just like I decided that I never kick policemen in the tush. I don't. I walk outside, I see some ugly policemen, but I don't go kick them in the tush.
Yeah, I've never done that either.
Have you ever run up to an attractive woman in the street and just kissed her?
Thought about it. But I've never done it.
You and me both. And the reason is?
I'm not that kind of guy.
Yeah. We're not those kind of men.
Yeah.
So character trumps willpower, and this system is really, I didn't make it up really. I mean, I'm very good at articulating it and kind of, narrating how to do it and looking at very practical ways to put it into place. But really, this is how people overcame their addictions 150 years ago. This is just working on your character, making a decision about what kinds of things you will do and what kinds of things you won't do. And in a very practical way, separating your constructive versus your destructive thoughts with that character line. Now, people are frightened of saying never. They're frightened of, like, never again. Are you kidding me? And how can you possibly name your book Never Binge Again? Because, everybody's going to binge again at some point.
Right. Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and as a practical matter, most people do make mistakes.
Sure.
What I've discovered is that the psychology of winning has very much to do with purging all of the doubt and insecurity from your mind. And so if you're an Olympic archer and you want to hit the bullseye, you almost have to be the bullseye. You have to have a very clear path to the bullseye. You have to see the boundaries of the bullseye very, very precisely. You need to be able to purge your mind of all of the doubt and insecurity and little voices that say, well, maybe the wind has changed and maybe I didn't really pull my arm back far enough and the target is really a little further than I compensated for. And you need to be able to purge all of that stuff from your mind, because that will distract you and cause you to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But if you don't hit the target, if you don't hit the bullseye, what you don't do is just take the rest of the hours and turn around and say, screw it, I'm going to shoot them all into the audience, or I'm going to shoot them up in the air.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You take it seriously, the fact that you missed the target. You'll evaluate by why did you miss the target and what do you need to adjust next time? And you get up and do it again. And if you keep doing that, your aim has to get better. But there's a key difference when it comes to these hyperpalatable substances because of the pleasure that they produce. So there's a motivation for people to feel like a failure. See, if after you make a mistake, if you let your pig say, well, you're pathetic, you're too weak, there's something wrong with you, you're diseased, you're incapable of hitting the target, you're incapable of not, of never having chocolate during the week again, then the pig gets to binge. And the pig says, well, since you're incapable, there's one good thing we could do. Let's just binge at least till the end of the day. Yippee. And it turns out that all of the self-castigation and, obsessive flagellation that we go through after a binge, its whole purpose is to get us to binge again.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's counterintuitive. In fact, that's and I'm certain that's not the plan when somebody beats themselves up about slipping from their plan.
Well, okay, so I'll use another analogy. Suppose somebody.
I'm not doubting you. It just sounds counterintuitive, as in most people wouldn't have come to that conclusion on their own.
Well, suppose you accidentally touched a hot stove.
Yeah.
It's supposed to hurt for a minute. It's good that it hurts for a minute so that you pay attention. There's a disease in this world, there's a condition where children don't feel pain, and those children don't live past 4 or 5 years old for the most part. They're not able to pay attention to the dangers in their environment.
Right.
So we need to feel that pain, which takes the form of guilt and shame at the moment when you touch the hot stove. However, what you're supposed to do then is pay attention, look at where the hot stove is, figure out how you're going to avoid touching it in the future, and then let go of the pain. I mean, it'll take a little bit to recover, but let go of it. You're not supposed to perseverate and say, I'm pathetic, I'm a compulsive hot stove toucher. Here, let me take my whole hand and put it on the stove because I might as well. You're supposed to use the experience, feel the pain for the moment, and guilt and shame for a little bit, and then let go of it. And you'll find it's very difficult to keep binging if you refuse to keep yelling at yourself. It's essential that binge eaters learn to forgive themselves after a mistake. It's essential, but it's also essential that they pay attention to the mistake and make the necessary adjustments so they can aim more directly at the bullseye.
I love that analogy. I love it. I used something like that earlier this week with somebody. Actually, it was last week, and I said something very similar about go ahead and accept that you really wanted this dessert and you had this dessert. Because we had this conversation, and I asked her this because she had one, and I said, "Did you enjoy it?" She said, "Well, not really, because I kept feeling guilty about eating this thing while I was eating, and then afterwards I was really mad at myself for like a day and a half." And so I explained to her something similar to what you did, not exactly, but I gave her permission to have it, and if she has it, to enjoy it, but just not to have one all the time. And in fact, I said, go one further. Why don't you plan a little treat each day? And so after a couple of weeks, she told me that she had about 2 treats all week, where normally she would have had 7 to 10.
Yes.
And she said, because it wasn't forbidden, I could have it. I just didn't quite have the interest.
Exactly. And I normally work with people like that. Now, there are some people for whom never is better than sometimes. There are some people who are not capable. I actually don't eat any chocolate at all because I think I told you my sister can have those 2 little squares on the weekend, and it's just not for me. But a lot of people find that exceptions to their routine really throw them if they don't also make exceptions in their food rules. And so maybe that means they'll allow themselves 2 pieces of bread at a restaurant, or maybe they're going to have, a half of slice of dessert from the dessert tray. Or if they're on a holiday family gathering, they have a slight adjustment in what they're allowed to have, or they make a slight allotment for when they travel. And it's really a very small list of places that get people. It's, travel and holidays and family and social gatherings and restaurants. That's really where people get in trouble.
Yeah.
And if you think through those situations and you make some conditional rules that maybe loosen things up a little bit, then it prevents your inner pig from getting up on its high horse and saying, oh, you're horrible, you're never going to do this, you might as well just be a happy fat person and let's just go binge. Because you know that you're in control and you've made those decisions beforehand. There's a big difference between deciding a priori before you go to the restaurant that you're going to have 1 piece of dessert and spontaneously letting your pig break your no dessert rule at the restaurant, because when the pig spontaneously breaks the rule, then it can tell you that you don't have the power and you feel like you're out of control, and the whole cycle can start.
Right. I made a rule for myself. It was probably about 20 years ago when I grew overweight from, bad habits, and I finally reached my breaking point. And I've told this story before on the show, but I reached my breaking point, and so I knew that I had to change my current habits. I had been eating burgers and fries and sometimes shakes for lunch 3 to 5 times a week. I would often eat pizza for dinner. I would eat ice cream whenever the heck I felt like it. I was essentially eating too much and doing too little. So I made a rule with myself that I wouldn't have a high-calorie, strong-flavored food 2 days in a row. Primarily French fries, but also burgers and shakes and ice cream and pizza. Any of those high-calorie, not so good for you foods, I said I will never eat. Well, I will not. I didn't actually say never. I said I will not eat them 2 days in a row. And 20 years later, I'm pretty much still holding to that rule. There's been a few times when I did have them 2 days in a row, but it never led into 3. And that's the reason I made this rule, was because I found that if I had it one day, I really wanted it the next, because now my taste buds were used to that flavor. So if I had it the next day, it was much, much, much more difficult to say no the third day. And then it started just leading into every single day. And then I'd have to get sick of it and cut myself off altogether for a good week to cleanse my palate. But I found that every other day still worked. And if I ate French fries, let's say tomorrow, the next day I would want them again, and I would say no. But if I still wanted them the third day, I would go ahead and say yes, go ahead, that's fine. And that has really, really worked well for me. I haven't had a weight problem since that time.
That's a really interesting solution. I hadn't heard that particular scenario before. I love that.
Yeah. So basically, I was stopping a habit from starting.
Yes, and the principle of neuroplasticity says that things which wire together fire together, and what you're actually doing is you're preventing them from wiring too strongly together. You do wire together somewhat when you have the French fries on one day, because you probably feel a stronger craving for it the next day.
Yeah.
But since you've made a rule that you're not going to have it on the second day, then you extinguish that connection, and then you rewire it the third day if you really want it.
Yeah, yeah. And having it the third day is pretty rare. Generally, breaking it from that second day stops me from wanting it again for another week or two or so, whatever it might be. But that rule has worked really, really well for me.
Fabulous.
So I like that, Glenn. Thanks for that information on willpower. Is there anything else that goes along with it? Because like I said, this is one of the first things that comes out of my clients' lips is something about willpower. I have no willpower. I've never had willpower. Something derogatory about their willpower.
Well, a way to prove to themselves that that's not true is to make one rule about their single worst trigger food or behavior. For me, it was chocolate. For other people, it might be pasta, or for some people, it's eating standing up or eating in the car. Just make one really clear rule, and then when you experience a craving, tell yourself, I know this sounds really silly, but change it from I'm craving chocolate to my pig wants chocolate.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason that you want to do that is that language gives you a lever to jump back up into your, better brain and say, well, my pig wants chocolate, but that's not in my plan, and I'm not going to feed it. Right?
Nice.
Yeah. So you don't want to let the pig confuse you about its voice and your voice. That's the whole point.
I get it. Nice.
And I typically have people not try to lose weight initially. What I want them to do is get a sense of power over the lizard brain. I want them to have power over their inner pig. I want them to see that it's possible to restore hope and enthusiasm and the ability to actually choose what you're eating, without stimulating the survival drive too much to say, well, I'm really, really hungry. You're going to starve if you don't have something. And my experience is the people that get it, they start off with one, maybe two very simple rules, and then they make adjustments, a few weeks to a few months later, once they really see how this game is played, to start losing weight.
Well, you and I are on the same page with that. Is gaining control is my number one thing. All right, Glenn. Well, thank you very much for being on the show again. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I love all of your helpful tips and information. I just know that you're changing lives out there.
Thanks, Glenn. Would it be okay if I sent people to grab the Food Plan Starter templates or a copy of the book?
Absolutely. Please do.
So I just want to let you know that, Glenn and I spend a lot of time talking theory here, but I've recorded a whole bunch of full-length coaching sessions so you can hear how the technique is actually implemented. And it's a much more compassionate technique than it sounds like in theory. We're talking about pig and pig slop and, we're both actually nice, compassionate guys. And you can tell that if you listen to some of these sessions. There is also a free copy of the book I can get you a free copy of the book via Amazon or Barnes & Noble or PDF if you go to neverbingeagain.com and sign up for the reader bonuses. And there's a bunch of food plan templates which have sets of starter food rules for paleo or vegetarian or calorie counting or vegan or just about any diet you could possibly imagine. We've thought through a set of starter rules, and you take them and you customize them for your own needs. And so that's all at neverbingeagain.com. And what you want to do is click the big red More button for the free reader bonuses, and then sign up for the reader bonuses, and you will you will get all those good things for free.
All right, very nice. And I will, of course, have those links on the show notes page at LiveFitPodcast.com. So thank you once again, Glenn Livingston, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you once again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Fit Podcast. Please subscribe and share with someone you care about. Read show notes, articles, resources, and learn more about our weight management programs at LiveFitPodcast.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and always remember to live fit.